This is a companion video podcast, which works best when used with the Meeting Your Dark Side Self-Therapy Journal. If you do not have the journal, please refer to the video description for additional guidance.
Shadow work. Shadow work is also known as meeting your dark side. And yes, that is correct. Shadow work does mean meeting your dark side, but it is a very misunderstood and oftentimes even misapplied technique. When we say shadow work, people tend to think something esoteric, as the name suggests, right? But let's not judge a technique by its cover, so to say, or by its name. There is really nothing questionable about this technique, nothing scary. In fact, this is a very effective way to solve problems which otherwise are hard to solve or have no solutions. For example, it can help you solve such problems as breaking free from guilt trips, dealing with guilt, right? Or being able to spot or manage, so to say, manipulation. It's also my favorite solution for managing triggers. I think overcoming triggers is priceless because triggers are involved in our anxiety, the level of our stress, even depression. So reducing the time when you or your partner gets triggered would improve your quality of life drastically. It's also a great technique for unlocking your potential. If you tend to feel overwhelmed and run in circles and never get anything done, well, doing shadow work will help you get 10 times more done than you ever thought possible, 10 times faster, and 10 times more effectively after you work on it for a while. There are also other issues it's good for, and we're going to be talking about them shortly. So it's a great technique to learn, but it's also, as I've already mentioned, a very mysterious and I must say very much misunderstood and misdefined technique. So this is what this course is all about. We're going to demystify the idea of shadow work. And my goal here is to help you understand what this technique is, what it isn't, how to do it, how to apply it to solving the above mentioned and other problems that you may be facing in your life and especially in your relationship, because that's what my focus is. It's relationships. So we're going to be talking about shadow work in the context of relationships, romantic or otherwise. It could be relationships with you and your children, relationships with you and your parents, and of course, relationships with you and your partner is going to be a big part of it. I am also a very practical person. So my purpose of this course is not just have you learn the theory of what shadow work is. I want you to walk away with a tangible result. I want you to experience a change already after taking this course. I want you to see something different in your relationship, an improvement, a step forward, a change in dynamic. So we're going to do a lot of practical steps in order to do that. Of course, I've got my team and my helpers here.
Looky, the curious cat.
An AI professor of psychology. Nice to meet you. Understanding the concept of shadows.
We are going to discuss the concept of shadows, dive further into what problems this technique can solve, besides the ones already mentioned, as well as debunk some common myths, fears, and iron out a few misunderstandings.
What is shadow?
So let's get started. First of all, what is shadow?
I heard that shadow work has something to do with our dark side. Is this true?
Shadow work is a technique that we use in psychology and holistic psychology that is aimed at helping you solve some very tangible, very real, very day to day problem.
Did you hear that? Shadow work is a technique in psychology. Although it does have a lot to do with what we term our dark side, or the things we may not like about ourselves, it is designed for us to become a better person, not worse. Shadow work helps with healing emotional wounds, overcoming difficulties in life, and even achieving goals.
For example, it's a good tool to turn to if you feel you're being manipulated. So, for example, you are in a toxic relationship and you really don't want to be in that relationship. You want out, but you find yourself being sucked into that relationship over and over and over again. That's probably my first go-to tool if you feel you are in a toxic relationship and you feel like you don't have enough control. Another great application for it is in business or in advancing your career. It's when you feel stuck. Like, for example, you are trying to start your own business, you've done the research, you've read the materials, you know what you need to do, you already have the steps mapped out, but for some reason you can't make a step from planning it in your mind to actually going out there and doing something. So day goes after day, and the dream keeps remaining a dream. So being stuck. The third example of when we would turn to shadow work as a tool is if you always find yourself on the receiving end of criticism and you kind of agree with that. So, like, you want to do one thing, but you do something else. You've sworn to yourself that you will not lose your temper with your partner because you know it's not their fault, and there you go again. And why I say the receiving end of criticism is that it's those situations where people would tell you, you know what, you need help. You need help. This cannot continue. Your outbursts of temper are unacceptable. I can't deal with the relationship if you're going to be like this, even a relationship or situation at work or whatever. And you agree and you say, yes, this is a problem. I need to fix it, and you can't fix that. It's out of your control. So this is probably one of the main uses for the shadow work. These, of course, are just a few examples. There are going to be more as we go along, but hopefully that paints you a picture of what shadow work is designed to accomplish. It's designed to solve your problems. It's not designed to create some kind of esoteric experience, right?
As a brief summary, the concept and the term of shadow was coined by Carl Jung, one of the founding fathers of analytical psychology. Carl Jung saw our subconscious mind as a powerful influence upon our feelings, decisions, and choices, and even our conscious thoughts themselves. In this black box of our subconsciousness, Carl Jung identified three universal entities by which we interact with the outside world. These spheres are ego, which is the construct of our self, our feelings, memories, and thoughts; then persona, which can otherwise be termed as a fake front, or the image that we present to others, the way we want to be seen; and shadow. We will be expanding further on these concepts as we go along. For now, here is the takeaway I want you to walk away with. In psychology, shadow is a term used to describe a certain part of our subconscious mind. More on this is coming up. This is what this course is all about.
That was an interesting piece of theory. Let's continue our conversation about shadows and see what they look like in real life, and also what they are not. Speaking of misconceptions,
What shadow isn't.
Let's see what shadow work is not.
I've heard that shadow work has to do with accepting yourself as you are. Like there are some qualities in ourselves that we may not like, as for example, being selfish or overly sensitive. I think shadow work is about acknowledging and accepting these parts of ourselves.
Does shadow work mean simply the ability to accept our dark side?
The idea of shadow work, the term itself, is obviously associated with accepting your dark side or getting in touch with your dark side. This is not necessarily incorrect, and we're going to be talking about this as we go along in this course. However, a lot of people take this idea of getting in touch with your dark side or somehow touching your dark side as accepting your dark side. For example, accepting the fact that I'm going to be selfish, I'm going to be greedy, I'm going to be a jerk, and by golly, that's how it's going to be because nice guys finish last. And if I were to get anywhere in life, I must accept this dark side of myself because it's going to help me achieve certain goals as we go along. No, nix. That's not what shadow work is, not even close. If somebody calls this shadow work, it's their problem, don't make it yours. So, number one, shadow work, even though it it does have to do with working with your dark side that we are going to go into a little bit more detail further down in this course, does not mean being okay with becoming somebody who reflects and lives the dark side. I'll explain and it will all make more sense. It will all become more clear as we go along. But at this point, I just want you to remember that this is not what we're going to do so that you don't get scared and you don't get confused. Another misconception about shadow work is that it is something esoteric. It's something dark. It has to do with some kind of questionable practices, right?
Okay, so shadow work does not mean making peace with your negative qualities. Maybe it means some kind of spiritual work with them?
Well, it doesn't. Like I already said, it's pure psychology, it's science. The only thing about it is that, yes, it does talk and it does involve the discussion about energy in our body. But again, so does the ultrasound, right? So does the EKG. The fact that we have biological energy, I think, is pretty much undisputed in our day and age. And shadow work does produce a very tangible change. So this is probably where this fear of shadow work comes from with a lot of people, is that it does pack a punch, so to say, in terms of changing how you feel, changing how you perceive things, changing the mindset that's behind what you do and therefore changing how you do things, how you react. And it's scary to a lot of people. Change is a scary concept. What we're afraid of is losing control. If what I do creates a change in me, I'm going to be different, and I don't know if I'm going to like this different. So, this is the subconscious program that makes us fear change. So, let me put your mind at ease is that if you do shadow work correctly, you get to approve the change before you create it. There won't be any changes that you do not anticipate. If you take this course, you will know what is going on, why it is going on, where you're going, how you're getting there. Like I said, you get to approve the change before it happens. I can't speak for other approaches that call themselves shadow work that are out there, but if you do this one, then that danger of losing control is not going to be there for you. The third misconception is the flip side of the two that I've just mentioned, and it's looking at shadow work too simplistically without understanding the details of what it is, how it works. It's like, okay, so I have the dark side, cool. Now I'm aware. I am aware, I am more present, I'm smarter than the rest of a lot of people because they are not aware or they're in denial that they have all those bad qualities. But I am self aware because I know I have a dark side. Now what? Well, I mean, it's good to be self-aware. Don't get me wrong, and it is a step ahead as compared to those people who think they're perfect and are not aware of their dark side and act accordingly, right? But it's a very simplistic, very basic approach, which really does not have any shadow work in it. It's shadow awareness as opposed to shadow work. There's a long road to hoe from that concept, and that's what we're going to do today.
Helena's credentials, her mission, and the differences between schools of thought and psychology.
Well, before we jump in, actually, now that I've been ragging on other people who have no certification, let me give you a little bit of background about myself so that you know that I'm actually qualified to teach this shadow course and that you will not have to fear that I'm going to feed you some kind of malarkey in terms of information. I hold my master's degree in acmeology. Acmeology is a new and emerging branch of psychology that translated from the language of terminology, from the Latin translated from the language of terminology, means the science of success. So, as the name suggests, it's a branch of the science of psychology which studies the dynamics that make some people successful and some people not so successful. And oftentimes, in pretty much the same setting, the circumstances are the same. The example that I like, and I use it in my Demystifying Bad Luck book, is something that most of us have witnessed in a real life in a different variation, whatever their real life experience is. Let's take two brothers. Both grow up in the ghetto, same family, same problems. One decides to get education, takes advantage of all the benefits that people in the ghetto could potentially get, becomes a successful judge, never touches alcohol because I see what it does by looking at the example of my parents. The other one is an alcoholic, and he says, my environment has made me so, and I'm a product of my environment. Why? Same genetics, same upbringing, same everything, two absolutely different outcomes. So this is what acmeology studies is. Why? Why does that happen? And this why is found in our subconsciousness. I think it's interesting to note, or at least from my point of view, is that American Western psychology is aimed more at our intellect, at how we think. There's nothing wrong with that. But Eastern and Eastern European psychology is more interested in how we feel, and the subconscious drives the subconscious processes that happen below the radar of our intellect before they become thoughts. And I think the whole development of the science of psychology is moving in that direction of realizing that what we feel and the subconscious drives are primary as compared to what we think, and they would determine what we think and how we act from there. A simple example that I'm sure we all are familiar with is that, let's say something upset you. Let's say you came to work and somebody said something that was very hurtful. And then you bring this either to a friend or even to your therapist and you go, hey, how could they do that? I am so upset. I'm so hurt. And that person would tell you, well, this is why and that's why, and consider that and look at it from that angle. And what your response is going to be is this: what you're saying is perfectly logical. I understand you completely. I agree with you completely, but it's up here. I still feel the way I feel.
How we feel determines our choices and therefore our actions. However, we as humans are empowered with the ability to act differently than what our feelings prompt. For example, I may feel angry, but I have a choice to either act it out by raising my voice, choosing an aggressive language, or even throwing things, or to not act it out and speak calmly and politely regardless. Well, at least in most cases, depending on one's personality and the level of stress, this control may not always be possible. And this is where the problem lies. There are two different schools in psychology today. One school focuses on teaching someone how to have more resilience and control. Having more self-control will minimize the number of instances when acting differently from how you feel becomes impossible. In other words, it aims to treat the symptom of a person's psychological condition, as, for example, throwing things as a symptom of anger. The other school, however, focuses on the underlying reason for why a person may feel a certain way. The reason for anger, for example, may lie in perceived boundary violations, in triggered past trauma, or some other emotional imbalance. And of course, if you remove the anger itself, the actions associated with it will disappear on their own. The first school of thought is behavioral psychology. It aims to protect the society from the undesirable actions of a person. The second school is the psychology of self. It aims to protect the person from any undesirable actions or emotions.
And so that's the difference between the focus of European psychology and American psychology, in my humble opinion, is that American psychology is going to focus on convincing you that you shouldn't feel that way. Just stop feeling like this, okay? Don't feel this. That's wrong. And to a degree, we can be successful. But Eastern psychology focuses on why you feel the way you feel and what can we change so that you feel differently. And a lot of people are actually a little shocked when I say this because their first reaction is that, why is that even possible? Can I feel differently? I feel the way I feel. I mean, can you even change that? Because we're so used to dealing with things on just the cognitive level that to a lot of people, the idea that you can feel differently is very foreign, when in reality, changes in our feelings happen all the time. You can feel very confident and then somebody says something that would undermine your confidence and you no longer feel confident. And the opposite is true. You can feel very unsure and then somebody says something very, very motivational and that gives you that oomph of energy. That is kind of simplistic explanation, but I'm offering it here to convince you that how we feel is subject to change and that our inner state of feeling, our inner state of mind is not out of our reach when it comes to exercising control in those areas. So, shadow work does have a lot to do with exercising this control and giving ourselves the extra motivation, giving ourselves the extra confidence, giving ourselves the extra peace and calm, whatever the energy is that we are lacking to create a certain state of inner being. And that's what we are going to do. The overall plan is to go over what shadow is, go over how we suppress our emotions and create those shadows, how to spot the shadow and recognize that what you're feeling is actually a shadow and you're not just feeling things just because or for some other reason. It's just kind of a sneak peek into what kind of practice we're doing and what to expect.
First, casual acquaintance with your shadows.
Let's continue our conversation about what shadow is and what it isn't.
With all this introduction behind us, casual acquaintance with shadow. What is shadow? Very simply put, shadows are suppressed emotions. But very simply put, there is more to this. Because when you suppress an emotion, it doesn't go away. It doesn't just go away. It gets bottled up and it starts building up pressure until we can't hold the pressure anymore and then it's going to get out no matter what. I often compare the attempt to hold in an emotion to the attempt of holding a fart or a poop. You're going to be successful for some time, some people longer than others, but eventually nature is going to take its course. So, same thing happens when we suppress our emotions. We can be successful some of the time, but we are not going to be successful all of the time. But unlike a fart that is going to get out and you're going to be done with it, while that emotion is sitting inside of us suppressed, it kind of poisons everything else around it in our subconscious mind. It doesn't just sit there, it sends out emotional and energetic toxins. And even when it would come out, oftentimes those toxins still remain and don't disappear just because that emotion was able to get out for a few seconds. So those suppressed emotions and the dirty work surrounding them is what is termed shadows.
So shadows are your suppressed emotions, on steroids, so to say. In the next module, we are going to take this concept to a new, deeper level. You will learn to understand what makes these shadows come out and how they manifest themselves in the examples of our daily life.